Okay, so today we're going to learn the final stuff. Tomorrow, then we are going to do a lab that's a lot of fun and a demonstration that's cool and review for our test, which hopefully will be Friday.
Yeah.
You guys sound so enthused. Okay, so today we're going to learn about sounds, and all sounds are produced by
Vibration.
Vibration.
Oh wow, I got it right.
You're so good. Anything that vibrates is going to make a noise, but not everything that vibrates makes a noise that you can hear. And we're going to talk about that too today. So, first thing I'd like you to do is take your hand and put it around your throat. And then I want you to squeeze really hard. No.
Oh.
There's always somebody trying to kill themselves right there. No. Put your hand over your throat and then make a beautiful noise like And what do you feel?
Vibration.
So we hear all these vibrations, and again, our vocal cords are what vibrates for us. But what's really cool is our vocal cords are hooked in the back of our neck, to the back of our neck, and to the front of our neck, they're hooked to this thing called a voice box. Yeah, and this voice box, it also goes by the name Adam's apple. It sticks out a lot more in guys than it does in girls. But the Adam's apple is able to move up and down, and as it moves up and down, it stretches your vocal cords, making them tighter or looser. So if you look at mine is nice and prominent. Watch. But you'll notice that as it goes up, it stretches the vocal cords tighter, and then when it goes down, it's why is that so funny? Anyway, types of sound waves. One way we can classify sound waves are whether they are audible or not. Now, audible sounds similar to edible, but edible means you can eat it. Audible means you can hear it. So audible sound waves can be heard. And of course, frequencies that the average human ear can hear are between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. So if you can hear below 20 hertz, you're a freak. If you can hear over 20,000 hertz, you're a dog. So that is the range that we can hear if you have decent hearing. I can't hear in that range anymore. I can hear the low range fine, but I can't hear in the high range anymore because I'm old. But this works at loud volumes. Now, if it's a softer volume, really our range of hearing is from 50 hertz to 15,000 hertz. So that's the normal range of hearing. To hear between 50 hertz and 20 hertz as it's going down, or from 15,000 up to 20,000 as it's going up, it has to be increasingly loud before your ears pick up on it. So if you have perfect hearing, you can still hear 20,000 hertz. I can only hear like 12,000 hertz because I have a lot of hearing damage because, well, there's a lot of reasons why I have hearing damage, but one of it is I'm old, but the other, you guys have all seen like those ringtones that old people can't hear. Yeah, those are ones that are up at the higher range here that you guys still have young ears and you laugh and you're like, how can you not hear that? And it's like, well, when you've been around as much heavy machinery and guns and things as I have, then and yeah, many of you are already damaging your ears, and we'll talk more about that.
What would be something that ranges from 20,000 hertz?
Bats talk in that range. So if bats are coming by and you can actually hear them talk to each other, then you're hearing in that range. Most of what they talk is above what we can hear, but
When bats are talking low,
you can hear them as a really high squeak. I can't hear bats anymore, but when I was a kid, I used to be able to hear them. So, yeah. But mostly, we talked about the other day how sounds are, the big wavelength sounds are not directional and the high ones are directional. What happens is these high frequency sounds, they're much more directional. And so when anything that's making a noise is not just making that fundamental, it's also making a lot of overtones. And those extra overtones, how they're blending in, help us to both identify what type of sound it is, but also where it's coming from. And as you get older, as you lose these high frequencies, you lose that directional ability more. And so this becomes a problem when you are in public. Like say you go to a restaurant Well, when you're sitting in a restaurant and there's 100 other people in the restaurant and they're all having conversations and you're trying to have a conversation, it's not a problem when you're young and you can hear all the high frequencies because I can differentiate between the people close to me and the people far away. But what happens is when you lose those high frequencies, you start hearing everybody equally. And so it's really hard to concentrate because I'm having a hard time. I hear you just as well as I hear the guy next door and the guy 3 tables over. And so all the sound just kind of gets jumbled in there. I had a friend who's a few years older than me and shoots a few more guns than I have and listens to music a little louder than I did when I was young. And so he was starting to go deaf sooner than I was, and we used to make fun of him at the restaurants because he would just smile and nod. But he didn't actually participate in the conversations because, yeah, and now I'm that person, so it's pretty bad. So I don't even like to go out to restaurants that are loud because it's like, I can't.
So you don't go to Chuck E. Cheese's?
Chuck E. Jesus? My youngest daughter, she called it Chuck E. Jesus, so that one stuck because that one's pretty cute. So let's go to Chuck E. Jesus, and we're like, what? Okay. Anyway, another way to talk about sound waves is what sonic they are. Now, if they are subsonic, the prefix sub means below. So if you are subsonic, then you are below what you can hear normally. So anything that's under 20 hertz is subsonic. Now, we talked about how the big waves travel better over long distances. And it turns out that elephants actually talk to each other in the range of 5 to 15 hertz. Now, they obviously also talk in the audible range because if you've ever been around an elephant, you know that they make noises, right, that you can hear. But elephants also make noises that you don't hear. And so when they're communicating to each other across the big, vast wasteland of Africa that's nice and wide, they talk, and we have radio tracking collars on a lot of the elephants. And so they figured out that sometimes when a female goes in heat, a male will come up to 100 miles away the next day and show up. And they're like, how in the world do they know from 100 miles away? I mean, the smell doesn't travel that far. So how did they figure this out? And one guy figured out, had a little physics background, said, hey, I know that low frequency sounds travel over big distances better. Maybe they're speaking subsonically. So what they did was they tape recorded some elephants seeming to not make any noise, and then they played it back at a faster speed. Now when you record yourself at a faster speed, and you play it back, you sound like the chipmunks, right? But
If you're too low to hear,
and then it comes back, it just sounds like a really low note. And so it's like, hey, they are talking to each other. So they recorded a female right after she was in heat. She didn't seem to sound like anything. And then they took it out and blasted it on some loudspeakers, and they couldn't hear what was happening, but these speakers could generate these low frequency notes, and a bunch of very confused boys showed up. It's like, she should be here somewhere, man. I heard it. Elephants. Whales also underwater. Again, those low frequency waves travel over bigger distances. And so whales will talk in subsonic, and actually if you need to communicate over a really long distance underwater like submarines do, they will also communicate in that subsonic frequency. Now, the opposite end of subsonic is ultrasonic, and ultrasonic are waves that have frequencies that are beyond what we can hear. So ultra means beyond, sub meant below, ultra means beyond. So ultrasonic is beyond what we can hear, so for me that's, never mind. Ultrasonic, so dogs and cats and bats and dolphins, they all talk a lot in that higher range. Bats, their low range is about 15,000 hertz, and they go up into the 30s. Your dog can comfortably hear up to about 28,000 hertz. So dog whistles, if you've ever seen those, dog whistles are about 22,000 hertz. That's comfortably within the dog's range, but it's beyond what we do. So you can train your dog when it hears this whistle to go bite somebody. And it's fun because you get to make the whistle and the person can't hear it, but the dog hears it and says, ha ha ha, and so you hit him. So, yeah. Have you ever heard of ultra or sub used in other words? Submarine means below the water. Ultraviolet is beyond violet. So who?
Oh, that we can't see that.
Oh, yeah, we can't see it beyond the vista. You also have things like suburbs. What's a suburb?
Outside.
It's the small cities that are outside a big city, but why is that below?
Because there's no.
Because the first suburbs were around a very important city way back in the day called Rome. Way back in the day. And Rome is a city on 7 hills. And so the city itself was up on the hills, and all the people that came to be near Rome so that they could like sell stuff to the Romans and that sort of stuff, they made these little cities down in the valley. And so they were below the city, and that's how they became called suburb. Urb means city. So below the city is what suburb means. So those of you who never took a Latin class, you never learned all this interesting trivia. Our last sonic word is supersonic, and supersonic originally was included in part A, but I moved it, oh, yeah, that's this one, because I thought it worked better with the other sonics. So we're including it here. Now, it has nothing to do with what subsonic and ultrasonic meant. This is talking about frequencies, but supersonic is talking about speed. So if you are supersonic, then you are faster than sound can travel. So if you're traveling faster than sound can travel in air, you're going to go faster than 343 or whatever it is at that temperature. And so that would be that. Now, what is supersonic? Jets can be supersonic, and so they create what's called a sonic boom. Now, have you ever seen a boat in the water? If the boat's going really slow, waves go really slow in the water, right? So as long as the boat is going slower than the waves go in the water, then whatever disturbance they make, it goes in all directions. But if you're going faster than that, what happens is all the waves that should go out forward pile up in a wake behind it. Have you ever seen that little V shape that comes out from the boats? That's called a wake, and that's basically all the waves that should be going forward but can't because the boat's going faster than the waves can travel. Same thing happens with sound. So if something is going supersonic, all the sound waves that should be going ahead of it pile up in a wake too, except it's not a V, it's a cone because it's a three-dimensional thing. So if this bullet is traveling past you, the bullet will be past you before that cone hits you. And that cone that hits you is called a sonic boom. And so if you've ever been watching movies where somebody gets shot and they hear the gun go off and then they feel the bullet, they're lying to you. Because there are some bullet rounds that are subsonic, but almost all bullets are supersonic. So that means you get hit and then you hear the boom. So yeah, movies lie. Yeah, so that'll happen. If you've ever heard a whip crack.
Yes.
Now, if you've got somebody who's good at cracking a whip, my son Isaias is really good at cracking a whip, and it sounds like a gun goes off. And the reason it sounds so loud is the tip of the whip actually gets going faster than 343 meters per second. And so what you're hearing, that crack you're hearing, is actually a little sonic boom. So, kind of interesting. So, yeah. Anything that goes faster than sound is going to be supersonic. If we are, does anybody know who the first person to break the sound barrier was?
Sonic the Hedgehog.
Sonic the Hedgehog, exactly. The first person, not the first hedgehog. The first person to break the sound barrier was
Jesus.
What's the Forrest Gump?
Anyway, his name was Chuck Yeager. And yeah, Chuck Yeager. And it was actually kind of funny because, you know, they had heard sonic booms but never with an airplane before. And so Chuck went flying past them, and after he was past them, they heard the boom. Now you have to understand that like the first 100 pilots before him that all tried to break the sound barrier all crashed. Or their ship exploded, or things like this happened because it was a tough barrier to break. A lot of people back in the 50s thought it couldn't be done. It would never be broken. Something weird would happen. But so when he went past them and then they heard the sonic boom, they actually thought he crashed. He didn't, because then he came over the radio. I did it. He became very famous.
How fast did he have to go?
Faster than, well, actually, it probably was a little less than 343 because it was a cold day and it was up higher. But yeah, basically, he was on a rocket that was attached to, I mean, it was a rocket with wings that was attached to another plane, and they were up there, and then they just kind of dropped the little rocket, and it took off, and he was steering the thing. And you had to be really gutsy to be a test pilot because pretty much 2 out of 3 test pilots in those days died.
Oh.
So they all thought they could handle it, but you know,
Better
yeah.
figure it.
Okay, when frequency gets bigger, of course, wavelength gets smaller, so the opposite would be true. So subsonic waves are going to have huge wavelengths. Ultrasonic waves are going to have tiny wavelengths. And so we talk about how the subsonic ones, they travel over very, very big distances, but the tiny ones are very directional. In fact, they're so directional that we can use them to see inside of us. This is really cool. So if we use ultrasonic waves, hey, that's ultrasounds. So if we use ultrasonic waves, we're using waves that are much higher than the speed that we listen to, or the frequency that we listen to. And these little tiny wavelengths penetrate your body, which, again, if you remember from biology class, your cells are mostly made up of cytoplasm, which is mostly water. And so since you're mostly water in your cells, then the sound waves travel really well through that water. And so it's kind of cool. But if we have these very, very directional waves, then we can bounce them off things and see the echoes that come back. And you start seeing little pictures. And back in the day, you had little ultrasound pictures that looked like this. Now you like see them and they wave at you and say, "Hi, Mom." And they do all these other freaky things. But back in the day, they looked more like this. And here, this is his big old head. That's his ear. His nose is, he's a little shy. He's facing a little away from us. So that's his, and this is his back, and this is his little back leg, and this is his front. I'm talking like he's a dog. So I don't know if it's a he or a she. It's the wrong angle. So ultrasounds are great, and people have a tendency to associate ultrasounds with babies because this is what we see a lot. But really, we look inside your body in a lot of spots. I've had ultrasounds done on my heart. People told me I was heartless, and we had to prove that I actually had one in there. And it was really cool because you could see it, and you could actually see my heart in there going boom, 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 and you could see it. And then they moved it to a different spot and focused the beams down farther, and you're seeing inside the heart, and you're seeing the valve of the heart go flip, 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 and it's really neat looking because you're watching what's happening inside your body. It doesn't hurt at all. You don't have to cut me open to see that. So it's a really neat diagnostic tool, and so you can see why people would like that. It's a whole lot better than surgery to see inside of you. So. Intensity. Intensity tells me how much energy is flowing through a given area, and we call this a decibel. A decibel is a unit of intensity. So intensity and frequency are going to tell me which sounds are audible enough. We already talked about the frequency range we can hear from 20,000 down to 20. So that's what we can hear, the frequency of audible range, but the intensity has to be there too. If the sound is in the right range but it's too soft, you still can't hear it. So the softest sound that we can hear is called the threshold of hearing, and on the decibel scale, that's by definition a 0. So a 0 decibel sound is the softest sound that a person with normal hearing can hear. If you're Spider-Man, apparently he has very keen hearing. Yeah, his spidey sense. I was watching Spider-Man with my daughter yesterday. She wanted to watch it. Dad, watch it. The loudest sound that you can hear, the loudest sound that you can tolerate is called the threshold of pain. You can hear sounds that are louder than this. They just start ripping your eardrum off the walls and stuff like that. But you get a point where you are just like, ow, this hurts. And so the threshold of pain varies a lot. When you're a little kid, the threshold of pain is right where it is, and every time you hear a loud sound, you cover your ears and you scream and you run out of the room. When you're your age, you say, turn it up more, man. And you like these loud sounds, and that's why by the time you're my age, you'll be going, huh? So we'll talk more about that in a minute too. So decibels basically is a scale that tells me how intense it is compared to the threshold of hearing. And the decibel scale is a little weird. It's kind of like the Richter scale is with earthquakes. It's not like if you jump from a 3 to a 6, it didn't double. It's several thousand times more. And so it's a logarithmic scale, it's different. So the intensity, when it's multiplied by 10, that's a step of 10 decibels. But as far as our ears are concerned, that sounds 2 times louder. So 10 decibels louder sounds 2 times louder. And so if we have 100 times more energy in a sound wave, how much louder does it sound? Well, what you do is you look at, if it's energy, you count how many zeros do I have? I have 2, so this is 10 to the 2. So if it's 10 to the 2, then I say how much louder it is, and then that's going to be 2 to the 2.
Yes.
2 squared is 4 times as loud. So that's how you figure it out. So the little magic formulas here are to find the energy, it's going to be 10 to the n, and if we find what it sounds like, it's going to be 2 to the n, where n is that number of 10 decibel steps in between the sound. So if the n number here is 2, that means there's 2 10 decibel steps. So if one sound was 40, the other would have to be 60 or 20. Get it?
Yes.
Everybody get those written down. Oh yeah, write them down. Where? Stuff it in there. So energy is 10 to the n, sounds like it's 2 to the n, n is how many steps of 10 did we go? Now, if we try a couple more problems, if we have 100,000 times more energy in a sound wave, how much louder does it sound? Well, here we got more zeros. How many zeros do we have? 5, so that's going to be 10 to the 5. What do you know? So if it's 10 to the 5th, then that means it's also 2 to the 5th. So if we have 2 to the 5th, then that's going to be 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 is 8 times 2 is
16,
times 2 is
32.
hey, what do you know? So that's going to be 32 times louder is what it sounds like to us. Easy, right? Now, how far apart would these be in decibels? 5 steps of 10, so that'd be a total of 50 decibels different between the numbers. So if the soft sound was 20 decibels, the loud one would be 70 decibels. That'd be 5 times, 10. So here, if we deal with decibels, here we got a 50 decibel sound. It's got 1,000 times more energy than some soft sound. What is the decibel rating of the soft sound? Well, again, we look at this and we say how many zeros? 3 zeros, so that's going to be 10 to the 3rd. So that means how many steps of 10 do we have? 3 steps of 10, so that's 30. So if I'm 30 decibels softer than 50, I must be at? That was tough. Now, how much softer does it sound? That's going to be 2 to the... What number do we keep it to? 3! Yes, 2 to the 3rd, of course, is 2 times 2 times 2 is?
8.
8. All these 2s, all these 10s. Really hard numbers. This is pretty simple, right? Okay. So this is what the decibel scale looks like. And you have that printed for you on the back of your notes there. So all I want you to do is highlight the ones I have in yellow. Why do you want those? Well, again, 0 decibels is the threshold of hearing. So if you have perfect hearing, you can hear a sound that is 0 decibels. I probably cannot hear a 0 decibel sound anymore because when you go deaf, you first lose the ability to hear high frequencies and you lose the ability to hear soft sound. Now, the next important number is, of course, 90. And 90 says, hey, that's the threshold of permanent damage. So if you have sustained sounds at 90 or higher, you're going to have permanent hearing loss. You have a question?
Oh no, I was stretching.
Okay. And then 120 is usually sometime between 110 and 120 is where most people start saying, ow, that hurts. If you're a little kid, it's lower. If you're older, it's higher. But 120, we usually say, ow, that was very painful. Now, if I get out my largest rifle and I shoot it in your general direction, I'm not saying I'm trying to kill you, I'm saying I'm shooting over your head, the sound is going to go straight into your ears. And guess what decibel rating a high-powered rifle is? If you're in front of it, it's about 170. If you're behind it and the sound has to diffract back to get to your ears, then it's only like 140. No problem. So, do you want to go out to a rifle range and shoot this thing 20 times with no hearing protection? No, this is very bad. Now, you have to understand that the higher it is, of course, the energy is getting more and more and more, so the time interval is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. At 90 decibels, you have to listen for about 40 minutes at 90 or above before you get permanent damage. But then the higher it goes, the smaller that time interval goes. And so when you're at rifle range at 140, yeah, that one blast is enough to do some damage. When you're at 170, yeah, actually if I'm shooting straight over your head and the rifle is going toward you, your eardrum often just rips off the side of your ear canal. It'll snap back and start to heal, but the first thing you hear is, and then you don't hear anything for quite a while as it's trying to heal. Sadly, I know this from personal experience. So, yeah. Now you're saying, well, how loud is a 90 hertz sound? Well, that squeaky thing that I made play yesterday, that was probably 110 to 120 when I got that going really loud. But was it that long? No, so you're not going to go deaf over that. But how many of you listen to headphones? How many of you listen to headphones loud enough that the person sitting next to you can tell what song you're playing? If they can hear what song you're playing, if it's loud enough that they can identify the song, assuming they know the song, of course, you're listening around 100 to 110. Now, at 100 to 110, again, you're going to have to listen to that music at that volume for like 20 minutes. How many of you figure you already have permanent hearing damage?
I go to
Yes.
a concert.
Yes, when you go to concerts, oh my goodness, how many of you have been to concerts? Okay, I want you to put your hands very loosely over your ears. Put your hands very loosely over your ears, and then say something. And you're listening to other people talk, and you hear how everything sounds kind of muffled?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard that sound before?
Yes.
Then you have permanent hearing damage.
That's true.
Yeah. Those of you who are in band, oh yeah, I mean, you come out of those pep rallies and you hear that sound. You come out of concerts and you hear that sound. And you're saying, but I don't hear that sound anymore, so it's all better. Well, here's the problem. Your hearing was here before you went to the concert. Immediately after the concert, it's here. And so you say, oh, that's horrible. And over the next couple days, it gets better, but not the same. And every concert you go to. Now, the funny thing about sound is the damage you're doing now doesn't really show up until later. And so you say, hey, I got no damage. I still have great hearing. You don't. What happened was my grandparents' generation and even my father's generation, they were all starting to need hearing aids in their 70s and 80s. My generation is starting to need hearing aids in their 40s and 50s. What happened between their generation and my generation? No, there's always been loud music that people have wanted to play. There was a thing called the Sony Walkman that was invented.
Oh.
And it gave everybody this opportunity to have their music playing through headphones as loud as they wanted to without bothering anybody else. And yeah, We also have an increase in size and quality of car stereos. So you're in this nice enclosed environment, cranking that volume up like, of course, none of you do. Yeah. Next time you go to a concert, I want you to bring this remarkable new invention they have. It's called cotton.
Oh my
It
god.
comes in little white balls. You rip one of those little white balls into 4 pieces, and you stick one piece in each of your ear canals, and you hand the others to somebody you want to talk to sometime later in life, and you have them stuff them in their ears. And after the concert, you're still going to hear that little muffled sound, and then you're going to go, "Oh, I forgot to take out the cotton," and you're going to take out the cotton, and you're going to not have that muffled sound anymore. You're not going to miss anything from the concert because it's so dang loud that the cotton will damper it a little bit, but you won't notice any difference in sound quality. All you'll notice is, I don't have a headache the next day. I don't have that going on in my head the next day. Yeah. Just the thing to think about, because I'd like you to hear. This is the remarkable device that we hear with. And this, of course, is called your ear. We have 3 sections to the ear. The outer ear here is made up of the auricle and the ear canal and the eardrum, and basically its function is to transfer sound into that eardrum. The eardrum's a nice thin membrane that sits there. And then the middle ear is made up of these 3 bones, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. And what they do is they take the vibration from here and bang on this thing in here. There's also a little tube that runs down here, and it's drawn badly in this picture because really this tube is in a closed position all the time. And the only time it pops open is if you yawn, chew, or swallow. So when you yawn, chew, and swallow, that pops open for a second. And what this does is, this is going to your throat, and so your throat has a different pressure than the outside here, and so it regulates the pressure. Because outside the pressure is changing all the time, and if pressure on your eardrum is going one way or another, it's going to put too much pressure, it's going to hurt your eardrum, and you're not going to hear well. And so you need to constantly be regulating that pressure, but you don't want it open all the time. So your body's designed to just open it when needed. Problem comes around this time of year, all the allergens kick in, and your throat and your ears start to get inflamed. If this tissue is normally closed and then it swells, guess how well it opens? It doesn't. Has anybody ever noticed when you have a cold or something that your ears hurt a lot? That's because the pressure outside is changing, but you can't adjust it. When you go up rapidly in a big elevator or in an airplane or up in the mountains, things like this, your air can't, basically the pressure is changing much faster, and it builds up, and then you chew, swallow, yawn, and your eardrum pops back into its neutral position. That's the popping you hear when your ear is popping. Is your eardrum had pressure and it pops back to neutral. When you're chewing that gum, that chewing motion is constantly popping when you station chew both. Exactly. I would always give my kids little chewy candies as soon as we got on the plane and we were ready to go up, and it's here, chomp on this candy, and then they're not staying. So, the inner ear here, the function of the inner ear is to take vibrations that are coming in here and turn them into nerve impulses. And the way this works is, this thing is actually filled with a fluid, and inside the fluid there's a lot of these little hair-like projections that are sticking into the fluid. Now, what happens is when the stirrup is banging against this, the fluid inside starts to flow back and forth, and the little hair-like projections are going woo in the wind, or in the waves, in your eardrum, or in the cochlea. And so they're wiggling back and forth, and that's sending, all these little things are connected to the nerve fiber. This nerve here is called the auditory nerve. And that goes to your brain and sends you the signal. So this vibration turns into a nerve impulse and goes into your brain, and we hear this as sound. So of course, if the vibration is hitting you real softly, then the little things move real softly. If the sound is loud, then they're going boom, 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 boom. Well, what happens if the sound is really loud? Sometimes they go boom, boom, and they don't snap back. At least 1 or 2 of them stays bent over. If it stays bent over, it still sends a signal to your brain that something's happening. That's that little sound that you hear, is you've got these little things that are damaged in there. eventually what happens is your brain says, I'm tired of listening to that, and it just tunes it out. It's not that it goes away, it's just your brain ignores it most of the time. And then it's real quiet, and all of a sudden, yeah, it's irritating. These are called the semicircular canals, and they're not drawn very well in this picture, but the semicircular canals deal with balance. Remind me tomorrow, and we'll do a fun experiment with balance where I will mess up your balance for you. Yeah. But first we're going to talk about instruments. Now, yesterday we learned how instruments are made and how they're designed and how they make the sound that they make. But I'd just like to talk about general categories of instruments. And we generally categorize these based on what is doing the vibrating. So next to strings, write strings, because that's what vibrates. So in a stringed instrument, you have things that have strings in them, and the string is what's vibrating, like in a piano, in a guitar, in a banjo, things like this, they're going to have strings. We have brass instruments that are generally made out of brass, and what vibrates in a brass instrument?
Air.
Actually, the first vibration is your lips. Remember that beautiful sound goes into the mouthpiece, and whatever's making a standing wave comes out on the other end. But the brass, what vibrates is your lips. And so examples of a brass instrument, of course, are a trumpet, a tuba, a trombone, French horn, things like that. Woodwinds are, back in the day, made out of wood, hence the name woodwind. But they're not all made out of wood anymore. But they are categorized based on how many reeds they have. Now, some woodwinds have no reeds, and they're just like blowing across a bottle like a flute. A single reed instrument has one reed that bounces off a mouthpiece, like a saxophone or a clarinet. A double reed instrument has two reeds that vibrate against each other, and the double reed ones have a very nasal sound, like the oboe. Then you have multiple reeds that have more than two reeds, and these are instruments that have, well, they're kind of varied. If you've ever listened to a harmonica, how many of you have actually played a harmonica before? Okay, if it has like 10 holes in it, there's actually 20 notes you can make. One if you push in the air, and one if you pull in the air. And so there's two reeds in each hole, one that's going each direction, so it vibrates depending on which way the wind is blowing. And so if you've got a 10-hole harmonica, you've got 20 reeds in that harmonica. You also have something that's very popular in Tejano music, an accordion that has a bunch of reeds in it. And there's also an instrument of torture called the bagpipe. My wife loves bagpipe music. She's like, at my funeral, I want bagpipes played. And it's like, why don't you play bagpipes at my funeral? Because I won't care and you'll get to hear it. And anyway. Percussion instruments are fun because you get to smack them. And so what vibrates in a percussion instrument is the entire instrument because you get to smack it. So that would be drums and cymbals and exciting things like that. Yes. And then our last instrument type, which is very new compared to the others have been around for hundreds or thousands of years, and the electronic instruments have only been around for like 60 years.
Synthesizer?
The very first electronic instrument was the theremin. Everybody, I'll show you a theremin tomorrow. It's a very strange instrument. But from the theremin was the synthesizer was designed. And so a synthesizer, all instruments that are electronic are essentially computers, and you have different interfaces to get notes that come out of it. But the first vibration in an electronic instrument occurs at a speaker. So an electric guitar is not an electronic instrument because the first vibration happens at the string. But that piano that I had up here yesterday, of course it wasn't really a piano, it was a keyboard. But if the power is off and I push the button, does it make sound? It might make a little clicking sound, but that's about it, right? You turn the thing on and then vibrations come out at the speaker. So electronic instruments, the speaker is the first vibration. So for homework, of course, you want to do 18. Hey, that's almost like